The ceasefire was 63 days old when the mine went off. Vera felt it before she heard it. A pressure in the earth, the way ground shifts when something underneath it decides to move. Her left foot found it on a downhill step, weight transferring forward the way it had 10,000 times before in 4 years of moving through contested terrain. Then came the click. Small sound, the kind a world makes when it decides to rearrange itself. Then light, then nothing. She woke face down in dirt that smelled like iron and char. Her ears rang with a high, clean note that had no source and no end. For a moment she lay still and let the ringing be the only thing. It was easier that way. It gave her a few more seconds before she had to know. She checked her hands first. That was the warrior's habit, learned early and never unlearned. Fingers moved, wrists bent. Good. She pushed up onto her palms, felt the sting of gravel in her skin, and registered it as information rather than pain. Pain was a signal. Signals were data. Data could be used. Then she reached down. Her legs ended where her knees used to begin. Everything below was gone. What remained was wrapped in hide strips, tight and professional, sealed at the edges with pine tar. She recognized the technique before she recognized anything else. Double wrap, left over right, tuck before the seal. Marin's work. The clan's healer had hands that moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and did not enjoy it and did not show that she didn't enjoy it. The wrapping was perfect. It had always been perfect. Vera lay back down. The sky above her was pale and empty, the blue of early morning before the sun has committed to anything. Somewhere east, birds were doing what birds do when violence ends. They returned slowly, careful, like tenants checking if the landlord has finally left for good. She did not scream. There was no one to hear it. And beyond that, screaming required a particular belief that sound would change something. Vera had stopped holding that belief some years ago. She inventoried what was within reach. A water skin, 3/4 full, dried meat wrapped in cloth, her knife. The knife was positioned within reach of her right hand, which told her something about the deliberateness of the arrangement. Everything had been placed. Nothing had been dropped in haste. The clan was gone, not fled, moved. There was a difference, and she had always known the difference, even when she pretended not to. One wounded body slows 20. The Appalachian ridgeline they had been crossing was still active ground, old mines and older grudges buried at irregular intervals. And the clan had 24 mouths and one healer, and the math of survival to consider. They had considered it. She understood the math. She had always understood the math. What she had not let herself fully absorb until this moment, lying in the dirt with the sky going pale above her and the smell of char still thick in her nose, was that the math had always included her as a variable that could be dropped. Not with malice, with arithmetic. The water, the meat, the knife within reach of her right hand. She had thought these might be kindness for a few minutes after waking, in the way that a person reaches for the most bearable interpretation first before the accurate one settles in. But she had spent enough time among her own people to know what these things were. They were a severance rite. In the old practice, when a clan member could no longer move with the group and the terrain did not allow for waiting, the elder or the healer would leave provisions within reach. Not enough to last. Enough to constitute acknowledgement. Enough to say, we saw you, we counted you, we have now finished counting. The knife was the final piece. Not for defense, for choice, a courtesy extended to those who preferred to decide the matter themselves rather than wait for thirst or weather to do it for them. Vera looked at the knife for a long time. She did not pick it up. Not because she wanted to live. She wasn't certain about that yet. But dying on someone else's schedule, with someone else's provisions, according to a ritual someone else had performed over her unconscious body while she was unable to object, offended something in her that went deeper than survival instinct. She would not be processed. She would not be concluded by other people's hands. She put the knife back where it was and drank half the water in careful sips. The first day passed the way days pass when the ground has stopped cooperating. Slowly, incrementally. The sun moved its arc overhead with the indifference of a thing that has no opinion about what happens beneath it. Vera's ears stopped ringing by mid-afternoon. The wounds did not bleed through the wrapping. Marin's pine tar held. She ate a piece of dried meat the size of her thumbnail and thought about mathematics. The water ran out on the morning of the second day. The meat lasted longer because she rationed it into portions smaller than any meal she had eaten in her adult life, eating each one slowly and thinking about the water the entire time. By the second afternoon, she had stopped thinking about rescue. Rescue required someone to be looking for her, and the only people who knew she was here had decided, with careful deliberation, not to look. She thought about the creek instead. She had seen it on the march in 3 days ago. A good creek, clean, running fast off the ridge. She had noted it the way she noted all water sources, automatically without deciding to the way a body notes things it might need and files them away. The distance was roughly 300 yards. She had estimated this from the sound of it. The way sound moves through Appalachian forest in the early morning before the birds get busy, 300 yards on 2 hands and no legs. At her current rate of movement, which she had tested in small increments throughout the second day, she could cover approximately 75 yards per hour before her arms gave out and required rest. 300 yards was 4 hours of crawling and most of her remaining dignity, and she was going to do it anyway, because the alternative was the knife, and she had already decided about the knife. She started on the morning of the third day. The ground was uneven, roots in loose shale, and the particular cruelty of Appalachian topography, which seems designed by something that wanted progress to cost something. She moved on her forearms and her palms and the remaining inches of her thighs, pulling herself forward with the methodical persistence of someone who has converted all available anger into fuel and is burning it at a controlled rate. She had covered perhaps 50 yards when she heard the sound. A tap. Steady. Metal on earth. She stopped moving. The tap continued, slow and deliberate, moving in her general direction but not toward her specifically. She turned her head and found the source 15 feet to her left. A man, human, walking with slow purpose through the field, pressing a long iron rod into the ground ahead of each step, feeling for resistance. When his rod found the right kind, he pulled a red cloth from his pocket and pushed it into the ground as a marker. Then he moved on. He was working east to west, which meant he would pass within a few yards of her current position if neither of them changed course. She lay still. His rod hit something soft. He crouched, brushed dirt aside, and found a hand. Her hand. He pulled back, looked further. His eyes moved up her arm, across her torso, found her face pressed into the dirt. He took in the rest of her in one slow assessment, the way a person looks at something that requires understanding before it requires response. Then his eyes reached the end of her legs. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him across the distance between them and did not look away. He was perhaps 50 years old, built lean in the way of men who do physical work alone over long periods. His left hand held the iron rod with easy confidence. His right hand hung at his side with the stillness of a hand that has learned not to attempt things it can no longer accomplish. The fingers were curled inward, locked at the second knuckle. Shrapnel damage, from the look of the scarring on the back of his palm. The kind of wound that severs tendons cleanly and leaves everything else functional and useless at the same time. His face was the face of someone who had decided, some years back, to stop performing emotions he didn't feel and see what happened. "You're alive," he said. "Obviously." "How long?" 3 days. He looked at the creek, then at the drag marks behind her. 50 yards of disturbed earth running in a straight line from where she had started. "Where's your clan? Where do you think?" A pause. He looked at the creek again. "You've been crawling toward the water. Since I decided I wasn't finished," she said. "And before that I was deciding." "How long did that take?" he asked. "About a day." He stood over her with the iron rod on his shoulder, running the arithmetic behind his eyes. "I can carry you to my place," he said. "Half-mile south." "No, you'll die here. That's my business. It's going to be my business when I have to step over you tomorrow." "Then step over me." He looked at her. She looked back. Her face was cracked with sun. Her lips were split. Her eyes were bloodshot and perfectly steady. He looked at her right hand, where the knife was. "Why not?" he said. "Your hands. The right one is half a hand. The left is dominant. The calluses are on the left. The scarring on the right is old shrapnel, maybe 3 years back. You're still clearing this field, which means you know this field, which means you know whose mines these are." He was quiet. The mines he was clearing were human-made. She had known that from the first day, from the design of the casing fragments half buried in the dirt around her. Human military issue, standard pattern. The kind laid in quantity along border positions by units that expected to hold territory and then didn't. The side that put these mines here, he said, then you understand why I'm not going to your house. I understand. Do you? Your people's metal took my legs. That's one way to say it. What's another? There isn't one. That's the only way. The silence that followed was the kind that happens between two people who have found the one subject that does not allow for easier conversation. The birds in the eastern trees went about their work. A small wind moved through the field grass and passed on without leaving anything behind. I'll bring water, he said. I didn't ask. I'm not asking either. He walked to the creek. He filled his canteen and came back and set it on the ground beside her. Not in her hand, beside her, close enough to reach, far enough to be a choice she made herself. She looked at the canteen, then at him. She drank long and slow. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. Why? Because I'm clearing this field and you're in it. That's not a reason. It's the one I've got. You have better ones, do I? You could say you feel guilty. Would that be true? Isn't it? She looked at him over the canteen. He held her gaze without flinching, which is harder than it sounds when one of the people involved is lying in the dirt and the other is standing over them with an iron rod on his shoulder and 3 years of accumulated decisions in the lines of his face. Guilt is for people who did the wrong thing, she said. I did what I was told. And now I do what I choose. And you choose to bring water to an orc. I choose to bring water to a person. Those two things aren't the same. They are to me. He walked south. She watched him go. The uneven stride, the right hand hanging at his side, the rod over his left shoulder. A man clearing mines planted by his own army, alone, one-handed, in a field that no longer belonged to either side and still held every grudge both sides had buried in it. She drank the rest of the water and did not crawl toward his house. He came back the following morning. Water, dried venison, a roll of clean cloth. He set everything down 2 feet from her and crouched to examine the wrapping on her stumps without touching them. His left eye tightened at something he saw, but he didn't say what. She asked him his name on the second visit. Kale. She tested it. Short. Short suits me. Does it? Does yours suit you? Vara means strike in the old tongue. So yes, you strike things. I used to strike everything. Now I strike mines. Is that a step down? Depends on the nail. On the third visit, she watched him struggle with a bandage knot for 10 minutes. Left hand and teeth, the knot slipping each time he thought he had it. She let him struggle for a while. He was patient about it, which told her something. A man who is patient with his own failures has either made peace with them or accepted them as permanent. Either way, it was a kind of honesty she respected. That knot will come loose by noon, she said. Then I'll retie it at noon. Or you could tie it correctly now. With what? She reached over and took the strip from him. Tied it in 4 seconds, double room, left over right, pull before the tuck. Marin's technique, learned from years of watching hands that move faster than anyone thought she was tracking. He watched her hands. Where did you learn to rap like that? Battlefield. You were a healer? I was a warrior. Warriors learn to rap because healers are busy. Busy doing what? Cutting off legs, apparently. The words landed flat, not bitter, factual. The kind of dark humor that comes from a place so far past the expected emotional response that the expected response seems almost beside the point. Kale was quiet for a moment, almost smiled. Vera caught it. You keep doing that. What? Almost smiling, like you're checking whether it's allowed. Is it? Depends on whether I'm the one being smiled at. Would that be a problem? It might be. I haven't decided yet. On the 4th morning, he brought something unexpected. A piece of bone. Deer by the look of it, cleaned and cut to a rough shape, smooth on one side, still showing grain on the other. She looked at it without reaching for it. What's that? Found it near the ridge. He set it beside her in the same spot he always set things. Close enough to reach, far enough to be a choice. You keep turning things in your hands. Stones, twigs, figured you might want something worth turning. She picked it up, held it to the light, ran her thumb along the grain. You carve. Used to. What stopped you? Being left in a field. Besides that, nothing besides that. The hands still work. She pulled her knife, made 3 cuts. Quick, angled, precise, a notch appeared, clean and intentional. What will it be? Don't know yet. The bone decides. He looked at her steadily. The bone decides. You read minds? I read bone. Do bones talk? They click right before they end the conversation. Is that humor? Is that a question? Depends on whether you're laughing. I don't laugh, she said. I observe. That's what people who laugh say. He almost smiled again. She caught it again. There it is, she said. The smile you won't commit to. I'm committing. It's slow, like your knots. My knots are improving. Your knots remain a problem. Good thing there's no one around to file a report. They built the shelter on the 5th and 6th days. It was Kale's idea in form, and Vera's idea in every other sense. She directed from her position on the ground, which was not a position of weakness. From 2 feet up, she could see the whole site. She knew exactly what needed to go where and why, and she said so in the fewest words necessary. He carried the materials. He could not tie the knots. She tied every knot. The shelter was not elegant, but it was sound, lean-to frame against a rock face, hide panels sewn with sinew, positioned to catch southern light in the morning and hold rock wall heat through the night. This is how warriors build in this terrain, she told him on the 2nd day of construction. Civilians build for comfort. Warriors build for survival. And which is this? Both. I want to see your face when I tell you that you've done something wrong. He built the platform on the 7th day. 3 rough-cut pine planks and a set of small wheels salvaged from a cart in his outbuilding, assembled on the ground nearby while she watched. The planks were cut unevenly. The edges were rough. His right hand kept failing the nail. You're going to split that board, I'm aware. Give me the nail. You can't reach the board from here. Bring the board here. He brought the board. She held the nail between 2 fingers, steady at the mark. He swung. The nail went in straight. Again, she said. He swung again. Straight again. Turn the board. He turned. She placed the next nail. He drove it. They did this until the platform was assembled, every nail held by her hands and driven by his arm, and neither of them mentioned the division of labor or what it meant or didn't mean. When it was finished, she lowered herself onto it, arms shaking with the effort. The wheels creaked on packed earth. She pushed forward. The platform moved. She pushed again, turned, rolled to the creek without assistance, filled her own water skin, and rolled back. Works, she said. You're welcome. I didn't thank you. You filled your own water skin. That's louder than words. Since when do you know what's loud? Since I started spending time with someone who won't stop giving instructions? I don't give instructions. I correct errors. Is there a difference? Instructions assume you know what you're doing. Corrections assume you made a mistake. The second one is more honest. She looked at the shelter and the platform and the campsite she had built from the materials of a man whose army had taken her legs, 1/2 mile from his house, in a field that still held dozens of active casings and all the patience of buried metal. Cale picked up his iron rod. Same time tomorrow, he said. That's a commitment. It's a schedule. What's the difference? Schedules you can cancel. Commitments follow you home. Is that what this is? No, she said. This is a schedule. Neither of them moved for a moment. He walked south. She sat with her hands on the platform wheels, the field around her in every direction, and watched him go. That 7th evening, after the fire had burned down to coals, she found herself thinking about his right hand. The way the fingers sat, locked into a permanent half curl, neither open nor closed. Useful for large objects, useless for anything small. He had learned to live around it the way you learn to navigate a piece of furniture that cannot be moved, not with grief, but with rearrangement. She had watched him use that hand all week. Grip an axe handle when he needed to split wood. Stabilize a plank against his hip when the left hand was occupied. The hand did what it could. It was not nothing. But it was constrained in its range in a way that frustrated him. She could see that in the expressions he didn't know she was reading. She turned the bone piece over in her hands. The shape was beginning to declare itself under the knife work. Something curved, something functional. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but she ran her thumb along the interior curve and began to understand what it was going to be and why she had been carrying it. The fire went to ash. The ridge above her was dark against a sky crowded with cold stars. Somewhere in the tree line, a nightbird worked through its single repeated phrase, patient and unhurried, announcing itself in the way that things announce themselves in places where silence is the default and sound is the exception. She wrapped the bone in a strip of cloth and put it inside her vest, close to her chest where the temperature was stable. Good carving required consistent conditions. She had learned that young before the war, before the clan had stopped seeing her, in the time when she was still counted as something worth teaching. She had spent years trying to stop remembering that time. 7 days in a minefield had given the memory somewhere to go. On the seventh morning, Cale arrived with water and a portion of smoked rabbit and a quietness about him that said something had shifted in the hours since the day before. He set the provisions down in the usual spot, crouched to check her stumps. The healing was good. Marin's cuts had been clean, the edges closing without infection. The pine tar had kept the debris out. Vera had kept the weight off the wounds entirely by moving only on the platform, which she had designed for exactly this purpose without Cale understanding that was what she was doing when she told him how to build it. "You're shaking," she said. He was. His left hand trembled faintly as he rewrapped the bandaging. "Concentrating. On what? Not hurting you? Does that take concentration?" "Everything takes concentration with one hand." She watched him work. The left hand moved with knowledge that had been earned over 3 years of making a partial hand do a whole hand's work. It was different from natural skill. Natural skill is easy in the joints. Earned skill has a held quality, like someone carrying something fragile over uneven ground. "I still feel them at night," she said quietly. "My legs, they burn. The toes that aren't there curl in the cold." Phantom pain. He held up his right hand, the frozen fingers, the curled palm. Different damage. Same ghost. "Your hand hurts. My hand remembers holding things it can't hold anymore. A body remembers what the mind tries to forget." He paused. "Mine remembers a hammer. A cup." He stopped. "My wife's face." The sentence arrived with a door attached. It stayed closed. Neither of them pushed on it. "Does it get better?" she asked. "The hand? The remembering?" "No," he said. "You just get used to carrying it." "That's not better, no. But it's forward." She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the morning field held its silence and its buried math. The red cloth markers from a week of clearing stood at irregular intervals across the visible ground, each one a small flag planted in the dirt above something that wanted to be forgotten. She put her knife to the bone and continued the work. She watched him walk south on the seventh evening and did not look away until he disappeared into the tree line. Not yet, she thought. The shelter stands. The platform works. She could fill her own water, build her own fire, carve her own bone. She had proved it thoroughly and without asking anyone to witness the proof. What she had not yet decided was what she was proving it to. The answer was forming the same way the bone carving was forming, from the inside out. Taking the shape it was always going to take, on its own schedule, in its own time. She turned the platform toward the creek and pushed. The scout came on the 8th day, before the storm, before Marin, before any of the things that would follow. Cale was halfway between his cabin and the field when he heard the horse. Wrong direction, from the west, not the east, not a trader's pace. Military rhythm, even and measured. The kind of riding that belongs to someone moving toward a specific destination with a specific purpose. He set the iron rod down and waited. The rider crested the southern ridge. Human, young, wearing a coat that had started its life as regulation issue and been patched so many times it had become civilian by attrition. Short sword on his hip, no insignia. But the posture was military the way posture always is. You can take off the uniform. The spine remembers. The rider saw Cale and pulled up. "You, Cale? Depends who's asking. Name's Solon. I ride with Harrow's company." The name landed the way a stone lands in still water. Not with violence, with displacement. Everything around the impact shifts slightly outward and rearranges. Harrow, Cale's old unit commander, the man who had ordered the mines laid along this ridgeline when they still believed they were going to hold it. The man who had called it strategic deterrence and moved on to the next tactical problem without looking at the ground he was treating as a problem to be deterred. Cale had been pulling Harrow's decisions out of the dirt for 3 years. He had wondered how long before Harrow came to check on his work. "Harrow disbanded," Cale said. "Harrow reorganized. Freelance now. Border security contracts. That what they're calling it. That's what pays. Solon looked past Kale toward the field. His eyes moved in the slow, deliberate pattern of a man trained to inventory a space without appearing to. Kale didn't turn around. He knew what was visible. Vera's shelter against the rock face, 300 yards out. The platform near the creek. The fire pit with its morning ash, still thin and gray in the early light. Heard there's an orc out here, Solon said. Survivor. Lost her legs in one of the old fields. Heard from who? Patrol spotted movement 2 weeks back. Harrow wants to know what's living on his old ground. It's not his ground anymore. Ground doesn't change owners, just changes who's standing on it. Last I checked, standing requires being here. Solon's eyes came back to Kale. He took in the iron rod, the dead right hand, the face of a man who had stopped caring about rank approximately the same time he started caring about accuracy. I'll tell him it's quiet, Solon said. You do that. Might come back to verify. Might find the road less cooperative. Solon held the look for a moment, then turned his horse west and rode without looking back. Kale watched the dust settle. Then he picked up the rod and walked to the field. Vera was on her platform near the creek, knife working the bone piece. She didn't look up when he approached, but her knife hand slowed. Visitor, she said, not a question. You saw? I see everything from this spot. That's why I chose it. She set the knife down across her knee. His commander? Old unit. A man named Harrow. I know the name. She was quiet for a moment. The way he sat his horse. Same unit posture as you. And the way you stood when you heard him. Your weight shifted. You went back years in the time it took him to crest the ridge. That obvious. To someone who has been watching you work this field for 8 days. Yes. He sat on a flat rock near her platform. Not close, the distance they had established. What does Harrow want? To know what's on his old territory. And what's on his old territory? An orc woman who won't go inside, Vera said. And a man who can't tie knots. Is that a threat to Harrow? Not yet. That's what concerns me. She looked at the field, at the red cloth markers running in irregular lines across the visible ground, each one a small flag planted above something that wanted to be forgotten. She had been counting them since the first day, 47 visible from her position. 47 was not the total. It was only what she could see. You could come inside, he said. Quietly, testing the words before committing to them, no. Vera, I said no. He didn't push. He had learned in 8 days that pushing Vera was like pressing against a rock face. Nothing moved. Your hand just came away hurting. He picked up the rod and went back to work. The storm came 3 nights later. Not the gentle kind, the Appalachian kind, that builds all afternoon behind the western ridge and arrives without announcement. Fast and cold and thorough, spending everything it accumulated in the hours before. The rain came sideways. The wind had strong opinions. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in the time it takes a fire to decide whether it will hold. Kale woke in his cabin to the sound of it, rain against the walls and sheets. The roof held, barely, one old seam leaking a thin line of water down the interior wall above the stove. He lay in the dark and listened to the storm work through its inventory of grievances. The window shuddered, the door breathed in and out against its frame. He thought about the shelter. He had built it sound, the frame tight against the rock face, the hide panels sewn close. It would hold. He had checked the construction twice. He lay in the dark and continued to not sleep. Then he heard it, carried on the wind, threaded through the rain, the kind of sound that doesn't announce itself as significant until it has already bypassed the reasoning parts of the brain and gone straight to the older parts. A voice, not calling out, not asking for help. The sound a person makes when pain has moved past the point where will alone can manage it and is coming out regardless. He was out the door before his boots were fully laced. The rain hit him immediately, cold and absolute, soaking through his shirt in the first 10 steps. No lamp. The dark under the cloud cover was complete, the kind that flattens distance and removes landmarks. He knew this ground. He had walked it every morning for 3 years. He knew where the flagged mines were, the 47 markers he could track from the field's edge, and he knew there were more he hadn't found yet. He ran anyway, not because he had forgotten about them, because he had heard the sound in the dark and the flagged mines and the unflagged mines, and the arithmetic of the whole situation had simply become secondary information. He ran through the field in the dark, in the rain with no rod and no lamp, in his boots finding the ground by memory, and by the attention of a man who had spent 3 years learning this specific earth, one careful step at a time. He did not stop. The shelter was holding, but barely. One corner of the hide panel had torn loose, and the wind was driving rain through the gap in horizontal sheets. He pulled the panel back and dropped inside. Vera was on the ground, not on the platform. On the ground, off the platform, hands gripping the upper ends of her thighs where the stumps ended, her fingers white with pressure, her body curved forward with the tension of someone fighting a fire that exists entirely inside their own nervous system. Her eyes were open. She was not seeing him. Phantom pain in its full expression is not a mild inconvenience. The nerves that once ran the length of a limb do not receive news of that limb's absence with any particular grace. They continue to send signals. The signals say burning. They say cold. They say the foot is curling in a direction the foot no longer exists to curl in. The brain, which has spent a lifetime trusting these signals, has no immediate mechanism for disbelieving them. The result is pain that is entirely real and entirely sourceless, which is the worst kind of real because there is nothing to treat, nothing to show, nothing to address except the fact of it. Vera had mentioned it once, briefly and factually. She had not mentioned how bad it got. Cale dropped to his knees beside her. Mud soaked through his trousers. Rain came through the torn corner and hit his back. Vera. She didn't hear him. Her jaw was clenched. Her breathing was the short, controlled breathing of someone rationing air. The hands on her thighs had gone white to the second knuckle. Vera, I'm here. They're burning, she said. Her voice came from somewhere inside a room he couldn't enter. They're not. Listen to my voice. The ground is wet. The rain is cold. You're here. Your hands are on your legs. Feel that. I can feel them, my feet. They're curling. You can feel the memory, not the feet. The memory of the feet. It's the same. It's not the same. You're here. The rock is behind you. The rain is real. My voice is real. Feel the difference between the fire and the cold. Her breathing changed, not immediately. The body doesn't give up its emergencies on request, but the pattern shifted from the short controlled rations to something slightly longer, slightly more willing to trust the air supply. Her hands found his forearms. She gripped. The left arm first, then the right. The broken one, the right one with the locked fingers and the scarred palm and the tendons that shrapnel had rearranged 3 years ago. She gripped both of them with equal force, her fingers digging into the muscle above his wrists, hard enough to leave marks. He did not pull away. Count something, he said. What? Anything that's here. Count the sounds. Count the things you can touch. Count what's real. She was quiet for a moment. 1, she said. Keep going. 2, 3. What are you counting? The times you've come back. Something happened in his chest that he did not have a ready name for. 4, she continued. 5, 6, 7. She stopped at 7. The number sat in the rain sound, in the wind, in the atmosphere of enclosed, urgent spaces, which is different from all other air. Is that real? He asked. It's the most real thing I have right now. The pain retreated, not gone. Phantom pain does not go anywhere. It withdraws the way a tide withdraws, still present at the edges, still capable of returning, but no longer covering everything. Her breathing slowed towards something approaching normal. Her grip on his arms loosened, not fully, but enough. Her eyes found his. They sat in the mud, in the leaking shelter, in a field that still held dozens of active minds in the dark around them, and neither of them moved apart. This can't keep going, Cale said. His voice was rough from running in the rain. The pain? You, out here alone in a storm with no one who can hear you. I'm not alone, you heard me. I ran through the field in the dark without the rod. I know. Vera, I know, she said again. Her voice was the same voice she always used, direct and specific. But there was a different texture in it now, like the difference between wood that has been worked and wood that has been weathered. One of us is going to get killed from this arrangement, he said. Probably you. You forgot your rod. He almost laughed. Almost. The almost laugh that had been building for 8 days finally got close enough to count. She was still holding his right arm, the broken one. Her thumb rested against the back of his wrist where the pulse moved under the skin. She didn't let go until the storm eased. Marin came on a morning when the sky had cleaned itself completely, the sharp, cold blue that follows mountain storms, clear and without apology. Vara heard her before she saw her, the deliberate footstep of a healer who has been trained to enter spaces without disturbing them, measured and unhurried, the walk of someone who believes their presence is either welcome or necessary and has stopped distinguishing between the two. She appeared at the field's edge, gray-skinned, older than Vera by 15 years, her healer's pack over one shoulder, her hands empty and visible. The hands of someone who understood that arriving unarmed was the clearest language available. Vera stopped carving. Her knife did not go away. Marin walked toward her. She did not rush. She passed the fire pit, past the platform parked near the creek, and stopped at a distance of 2 feet, the same distance Kale had maintained for the first 8 days. The same distance Vera had established as the boundary between present and manageable. Marin recognized it. Her eyes moved to the ground between them, then back to Vera's face. "I'm here to check the work," she said. "I can see that. May I? You didn't ask last time. Last time you were unconscious." Vera looked at her for a long moment. Marin stood in the 2-foot distance and did not step forward and did not step back. She had the patience of someone who has waited in harder places than an Appalachian field and come away having learned something from it. Vera set her knife down, not far, within reach, but down. Marin crouched and unwrapped the stumps with the hands of someone who knows what they're going to find and is checking their knowledge against fact. She pressed, tested the tissue, examined the edges. Her face was the healer's face, clinical and attentive, temporarily suspended above whatever feelings might exist underneath it. "Clean," she said, "no infection. Good mobility in the hip joints." She paused. "Who's been rewrapping these?" "Me. Someone taught you the technique." "You taught me. I watched every time you worked on wounded in the camp. I watched your hands. Double wrap, left over right, tuck before the seal." Marin's hands paused on the rewrapping. She went still in the way that people go still when a sentence has said more than it was asked to. "I didn't know you were watching. You didn't look." The sentence carried more weight than bandaging technique. It carried years of it. The fires walked past. The meals that stopped at the boundary of her space. The conversations that moved around her like water around a stone. Not hostile, not even intentional, just the accumulated habit of not including something that didn't register as fully present. Marin heard all of it. Her hands resumed their work, but more carefully, the way hands move when the rest of the body has become aware that it is being assessed on more than one level. Vera let the silence sit for 3 breaths. Then she asked the question she had been holding since the morning she woke in the dirt, with the pine tar still wet and the sound of footsteps already gone. "Did you hesitate before you walked?" Marin was quiet for a long time, long enough that the creek had something to say about it. A hawk worked the updraft above the ridge, patient, doing its work. "Yes," Marin said. "How long? Long enough to know I shouldn't have." The words landed in a different place than Vera had expected. She had anticipated a clean answer. Yes or no, something she could file as confirmed or refuted and move on from. What she had not expected was the weight inside the answer, the specific gravity of something that had been carried for a while and was being set down with care. "Then why?" Vera said. "Why did you walk?" "I was carrying 2 others. Yolan had a collapsed lung. Prith had taken shrapnel to the femoral, and I had 2 fingers inside the wound holding her blood in. I could not carry a third. My hands were not free." She paused. "I left the knife as the courtesy. Not because the clan's math told me to. Because you were the only one of us I trusted to decide for yourself." Vera stared at her. "You left the knife. It was all I had left." The anger was old. It had been living in her since she woke in the dirt, and it had a particular temperature. Not hot, not cold, but the steady warmth of something that has been maintained for a long time through deliberate effort. It did not go out, but something shifted underneath it. Not forgiveness. Understanding, which is different, which costs more, which is harder to arrive at because it doesn't resolve anything. It only makes the situation more complete. "I remember the sound of your footsteps going quiet," Vera said. "I remember what the field sounded like without you in it," Marin said. "What it sounded like after." They sat not warmly, not comfortably, but with the specific weight of two people who have been on opposite sides of the same wound for long enough that neither side feels like the easy one anymore. The kind of sitting that happens before understanding and after anger, in the space where neither has been replaced by anything else yet. Marin finished rewrapping with a new technique. Tighter, a layer of treated hide beneath the cloth, positioned to reduce the nerve compression that triggered the phantom episodes. This will help with the burning, she said. The episodes, her voice was steady but not distant. It won't stop them, but it changes them. The body stops screaming when it has something else to listen to. When will that happen? When you give it something louder. Marin stood, looked at the shelter, the platform, the campsite built between Rockface and Creek and Minefield. Looked at the flag markers across the field, at the line of them pointing toward a cabin visible through the tree line half a mile south. You built this with help. Yes, the man, Cale, human. Marin was quiet for a moment. Does that matter to the clan? Am I in the clan? Are you? I'm in a minefield with a human building things, Vera said. Is that an answer? It's a better one than walking past someone's fire. Marin looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded. Not approval. The acknowledgement of a healer who has watched a patient recover in a direction the textbook didn't predict and is revising her understanding of the textbook accordingly. She walked back the way she came, slow and deliberate. The same footstep that had walked away from Vera in a different field, in a different season, when the sound of it fading was the last thing Vera had heard before the silence took over. This time, Vera watched until Marin disappeared. She did not reach for the knife. The hour that followed was the quietest she had spent since the mine. Not the silence of the field, which was the silence of emptiness. This was a different kind. The sound of a door unlocking inside a room she had bolted shut. Marin had walked away from her twice now. Both times Vera had survived it. The first time by crawling. The second time by sitting still. She wasn't sure which had taken more from her. She turned the bone piece over in her hands. The interior curve was nearly finished. She ran her thumb along it and understood, for the first time fully, exactly what it was going to be. She was almost ready to tell him. Not yet, but almost. The next morning she was at the creek filling her water skin when she heard it. The iron rod working its way east to west, Cale's slow, careful rhythm, feeling for the resistance that meant the math had another term remaining. She tracked him by sound across the field without looking up. Then she heard the rhythm change. It was subtle. The rod's cadence shifted, tap and lift and tap again. But on the third tap from a new position, it came down differently. Too fast. The pace of a man whose attention had been somewhere else for one step too many. She knew what distraction sounded like in that field because she had been listening to him work it for 9 days, and she knew the difference between his focused tap and his unfocused one because that was the kind of thing she noticed even when she didn't decide to notice it. She looked up. He was 40 yards out, north-northeast, rod in his left hand, and his weight was already transferring forward onto the foot that had just stepped where the rod had just been, and the rod had come down wrong. She didn't think. Hold. One word. Flat and direct, aimed at him with the precision she had used on moving targets for 4 years of a war she had survived by being accurate in the right moments. Cale froze. The weight stopped transferring. His foot was down, but the weight was back, suspended by the kind of reflex that doesn't require a decision because the decision has already been made by years of training. He froze. He looked down. His boot was 2 inches from a casing his rod had crossed without finding, partly because the rod had come down at the wrong angle, and partly because the casing had shifted in the recent rain and now sat 6 inches shallower than it had been the day before. The red cloth marker for this one was 8 feet to the east, flagging where it used to be. Cale stood motionless. Then he stepped back carefully, retracing the exact line of his incoming step. He marked the new position with fresh cloth, stood for a moment looking at the ground. Then he looked over at her. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. She filled her water skin and pushed the platform back toward the shelter, and he stood in the field for a while longer before he resumed the rod work. From that morning onward, he paused before leaving the cabin's sightline and looked toward the creek first. They both knew why. Neither of them said so. That evening, she rolled along the packed earth path that Cale used every morning, following it further than she usually did, no reason she was ready to state plainly. She went far enough to see the cabin's front face, the door, the porch step. She stopped there. The threshold was wrong. Or rather, it was right, which was what was wrong about it. The original threshold had a lip on it, a 2-inch rise, pine board worn smooth on the upper edge from years of boot traffic. She had noted it on the 8th day, from a distance, with the automatic assessment of someone who measures every environment they enter for what it will cost them to move through it. The lip was gone. The board had been replaced with a new piece, flush cut and flush fitted, the raw wood still showing pale against the weathered boards around it. No lip, no rise. A flat transition from porch boards to cabin floor, exactly the width required for a platform with wheels to pass over without catching. She sat on her platform in the evening light and looked at the threshold. She thought about when he had done it. He would have needed a full evening of working light to cut the board and fit it properly. The night after the storm was her best guess. While she had been sitting in the shelter counting, he had been thinking about the threshold. He had not mentioned it. She had not asked. She sat for a long time. The light changed. The ridge above the cabin went from gold to gray to the blue that precedes dark in mountain country, the color of something making up its mind. An owl started its evening work in the tree line. The creek said what it always said. She thought about the platform and the shelter, and the canteen set beside her hand rather than in it. She thought about the rod coming down wrong in the field, and the single word she had said, and the way his weight had stopped. She thought about 7 mornings and 7 evenings and a bone piece that was finished becoming what it had always been going to become. She had built the shelter to prove she didn't need the cabin. She had proved it. The shelter stood. The platform worked. She could fill her own water and build her own fire and carve her own bone and tie every knot that needed tying. None of that had changed. What had changed was simpler and harder to name. She was tired of proving it to an audience of one. Not because the proof had failed, because it had succeeded completely, and the success had left her with a question the proof hadn't addressed. Cale came back the next morning at the usual time. Same rhythm, same iron rod on his shoulder, same unhurried step. He saw Vera's face when he reached the shelter, and he stopped. What happened? She looked at him, at the rod, at the right hand hanging at his seat and with its locked fingers and its patient uselessness. At the left hand that had been carrying things for 8 mornings without being asked. She had one question. Is the offer still open? He looked at her without rushing the answer. He had a way of receiving questions that gave them room to be what they actually were. Which offer? The cabin. It's always been open. I know that now. I wasn't ready before. And now she looked at the shelter, at the hide panels sewn tight against the rock face, at the fire pit with its ring of stones she had placed herself, at the field stretching around it in every direction, its red cloth markers bright in the morning light, each one a small flag planted above something that had been waiting longer than either of them for someone to find it. I built this to prove I didn't need your house, she said. I proved it. She reached out her hand, the left hand, the one that tied knots and held nails and had been carving bone for 11 days into something she hadn't named aloud yet but understood completely. He reached out his left hand, the one that had been carrying water and food and clean cloth for 8 mornings without being asked once. The one that swung hammers and held iron rods and had come back every single day without needing a reason beyond the one he always gave, which was the truest kind of reason there is. She took it. Now I'm choosing it, she said. The cabin was smaller than she had expected. 1 room, split pine walls, the boards warped slightly from years of heat and cold cycling through the same wood. A stove in the corner, iron, old, the kind that holds heat long after the fire has gone to ash. A table with 2 chairs, rough cut, sanded imprecisely, solid in the way that things are solid when someone built them to last rather than to look like they would last. A cot against the far wall, narrow wool blanket, 1 pillow set square at the head. The floor was swept clean but uneven, and a crack ran through the plaster above the stove, patched with clay that had dried lighter than everything around it. Vera rolled through the doorway, and the wheels caught on nothing. She stopped in the center of the room and looked at the threshold behind her, the new board, pale and flush. She looked at it for 1 moment, then looked forward. It's clean, she said. I swept. When? This morning. When you said you'd come, and the timing, coincidence. You're a poor liar. I'm an excellent liar. You're just observant. She rolled to the table, ran her hand along the surface, feeling the grain, the imprecise sanding, the specific texture of work done by someone with one functional hand and enough patience to compensate. She looked at the two chairs. Both had the wear of furniture used for years by the same weight in the same position. Two chairs, she said. I had them before you. Who was the second for? The question sat in the room without apology. Cale was quiet for a moment, his left hand working the fire starter, the right hand resting against the stove's side panel for balance. Someone who isn't here anymore. The wife, yes. She sat at this table. Every morning, he paused. Every evening, too, for a while. And you kept the chair. He got the fire started, closed the stove door, turned around. Couldn't figure out what to throw away, he said. The chair or the habit? Both. Vera looked at the chair, at the wear pattern on the seat, the slight smoothing of the front edge from years of someone sitting forward. Then she locked her platform wheels, placed her hands on the table edge, and pushed herself up and across. Her arms took the weight. The transfer was effortful, and she did not ask for help, and he did not offer it. She settled into the chair, both hands flat on the table surface, and sat in the seat that had been holding its breath for 3 years, waiting for someone to use it again. Cale stood by the stove and looked at her in the chair. I need to tell you something, she said. All right, I'm not here because I'm afraid of what comes next. I know. I'm here because I chose to be. I know that too. Do you know the difference between those two things? He leaned against the wall beside the stove. Fear is moving towards shelter, he said. Choice is moving towards something. I can't move toward anything. I roll. Same principle. It's not the same principle. It's close enough. You keep saying that. It keeps being accurate, Amon. That first night, Vera slept on the platform beside the stove. Not the cot. The platform positioned with its head toward the fire and its wheels locked against the floorboards. She did not explain this, and Cale did not ask about it. He slept on the cot and left the lamp burning at its lowest setting, and in the morning the cabin smelled like pine resin and wood smoke and the particular warmth of a space that has stopped holding its breath. The days changed shape, not dramatically, not all at once. The way light changes in a room when someone opens a window that has been closed for a long time. Gradually, and then you can't remember what it was like before the window was open. There were sounds where there had been silence. The roll of the platform wheels on uneven floorboards, the tap of her knife on bone in the evenings, the low hum she made when she was concentrating. A sound she seemed unaware of, steady and toneless, the sound of a mind fully occupied with its work. Cale noticed these things with the attention of someone cataloging changes in a landscape he had thought he had finished mapping. He noticed other things too. The way she positioned herself with her back to the wall whenever possible. Always. The way her knife was never more than a forearm's reach away. The way her eyes moved to the window each time a sound came from outside. The assessment happening before the conscious decision to assess. Not the habits of a frightened person. The habits of someone who had learned, through specific experience, that awareness is the one resource you cannot replace once it's gone. You're watching the road, he said, on the second morning. I'm watching everything. Is that warrior or habit? Warriors stop when the war does, she said. Habits don't get the message. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the rod by the door, the rifle above the mantel. He thought about the way he slept, always facing the entrance, always with one ear monitoring the distance outside. He had not framed it as a habit. He had framed it as practical. The distinction, he realized, was thinner than he had been telling himself. On the third morning, she pushed her breakfast plate away. Not far, just enough that the smell moved with it. Not hungry, he asked. Not for that, same as yesterday. Yesterday, it didn't smell like iron. She was looking at her carving, not at him. The bone piece was close to finish now. He could see that, though he still couldn't make out the full shape. She worked the final stages with small, precise cuts, shavings falling into her lap like pale snow. You smell iron and dried venison, he said carefully. I smell things differently than you do. Differently than other orcs too, she said. The scentless condition runs in both directions. What does that mean? It means some things I don't smell at all, and some things I smell before they're supposed to be there. She set the carving down and picked up the plate and ate without further comment. He filed the information carefully in the place where he kept things she said that he didn't yet fully understand but suspected he would. On the fourth evening, she asked him to move his chair closer to the stove, not to the table, to the stove where the warmth pooled and the lamplight was softer and the shadows in the room had a different quality. Less like absence and more like presence. He brought his chair over. She stayed on the platform. They sat at the angle people sit when they are not yet ready to face each other directly, but have stopped needing to face away. "Give me your hand," she said. "Which one?" "The right." He held it out, the right hand. Curled fingers locked at the second knuckle. The palm scarred and stiff, the skin there tighter. The kind that forms over damage that has been covered and sealed rather than allowed to heal open. She took it in both of hers. "Can you feel this?" "Some. The base of the palm, mostly." She pressed her thumb against his wrist, just above the joint. "This?" "Yes." She moved to the back of his hand. "This?" "Less. Around a 4. She touched the knuckle of the index finger. "This?" "Almost nothing." She was quiet for a moment. Then almost is enough. Enough for what? She didn't answer immediately. She turned his hand over and held it, both of hers around it, the way you hold something that requires steadiness rather than grip. Then she raised it and held his broken hand against her jaw, the palm against her cheekbone, the locked fingers resting along the side of her face, immobile but present, warm against her skin. He went very still. "What are you doing?" he said. His voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it for a long time. "Teaching your hand something new to remember." He didn't pull away. His frozen fingers rested against her jaw in the lamplight, unable to close, unable to grip, but warm, and the warmth traveled up through the damaged tendons and the locked joints and into a place in his chest that he had been telling himself for 3 years was empty because that was easier than telling himself it was sealed. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At what?" "At staying still when someone's close." "Then move." "I don't want to move." "Then stay." "I am staying." "I know," she said. "That's why I asked for the broken hand. The working hand knows how to leave. The broken one forgot how." He was quiet for a long time. The stove ticked. The lamp held its small light against the dark. Outside the window, the ridge was a black line against a sky crowded with more stars than the sky has any practical need for. "Is the carving finished?" he asked. "Almost," she said. She lowered his hand. "By morning it was done." She was at the table when he woke, the platform locked in position, the bone piece in front of her on the cloth she used to catch the shavings. He dressed and crossed the room and sat across from her. The bone piece was a brace. He saw that immediately. A hand brace, formed from a single piece of deer bone, carved to fit the specific curve of a right hand whose fingers had locked at the second knuckle and would not release. The interior was smooth, polished with oil rubbed in over days until it had the quality of something finished with intention rather than just completed. The exterior had ridges, shallow and evenly spaced, designed to provide grip where the palm could no longer provide it naturally. The fit, he could see from looking at it, was not approximate. It was exact. She had spent 11 days measuring his hand with her eyes and her thumb, and the attention of someone who had been watching him try to hold things for long enough to understand what he needed and where. He looked at it and then at her. "What is this?" "A brace for your right hand. Try it." He picked it up with his left hand, turned it over, felt the interior curve, the ridges, the weight of it, lighter than he expected because she had carved it to exactly the necessary thickness. No more. He slid his right hand into the brace. The curve cradled the locked fingers, supporting them in their position rather than fighting it. The ridges sat against his palm where the grip was absent. She leaned forward and fastened the straps. 2 of them, sinew-tied, tight, and professional. The same wrapping technique, the same precision. "Now the cup," she said. He reached for the tin cup on the table. His right hand, the hand that had not gripped anything smaller than an axe handle in 3 years, closed around the cup. Not because the fingers moved, they didn't move, but the brace held the position, the ridges caught the surface, and the cup was in his hand and stayed there. He lifted it, set it down. "Again," she said. He lifted it again, set it down. The second time was steadier than the first. The third time steadier still. The expression on his face was not the almost smile. It was something older and quieter than that. The expression of a man who has been handed back something he had accepted as permanently gone and is discovering, with some disorientation, that acceptance and surrender are not the same thing, and he had been confusing them for 3 years. He looked at her. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to thank you." "What were you going to say?" He looked at the cup, at his right hand holding it, at the brace she had made from a piece of bone she had found in a minefield and carried in her vest for 11 days while she figured out what it was going to become. "That my hand is holding a cup," he said, "and my chest is doing something I don't have a name for right now. It's called feeling," she said. "People do it, not people like me, especially people like you." She reached into her vest and brought out two small objects and set them on the table between them. Two bone beads, small and round, each carved with a single line. His had the notch on the left side. Hers had the notch on the right. Set together, the lines would meet and form one continuous mark. He looked at them without speaking. "In my clan," she said, "when two people chose each other, they exchanged beads. One cut left, one cut right. Together, they make a whole line. It was the binding. Marriage, or the closest word I have for it, in your language." She looked at him across the table, at the cup still in his braced right hand, at the lamp between them throwing its light equally on both of them. "You're proposing," he said. "I'm offering. In my clan's tradition, the clan that no longer has any standing to claim that tradition. Why now? Because the brace is finished. Because I've been in this cabin 4 days and I know the answer. Because I'm done waiting to know what I already know." He set the cup down carefully. The brace held. He picked up his bead with his left hand, turned it once, then transferred it to his right hand. The braced hand, the finger supported by her carving, closed around the bead, and it was the first thing that hand had held in 3 years that was not a tool or a handle or an object of necessity. He held it for a moment. Then he held it out to her. She held hers out to him. They traded. No ceremony. No words spoken over the exchange, because the exchange was the word. The crack in the wall above the stove observed. The lamp observed. The cup on the table observed. No witnesses beyond what was already in the room. The fire in the stove ticked once. The lamp held its steady light. Outside, the field was quiet in the way that fields are quiet when the work of the day has not yet begun. The red cloth markers standing at their posts in the early light, patient and still. Cale turned his bead in his braced hand. The brace held. "There's something else," Vera said. He looked at her. "I need you to not panic." That's a poor way to begin a sentence. It's the accurate way. She held his gaze across the table, the same steadiness that had been there since the first day in the field. Eyes that did not ask and did not beg and did not flinch. "I'm pregnant." The cabin went still, not quietly still, completely still, the way a space goes still when everything in it has stopped to attend to a single fact. The stove ticked once and then seemed to reconsider. Cale did not move. "How?" he said. "The usual way." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean," she said. "The clan said no. Marin said unlikely. Something about the scentless condition, about the chemistry being wrong. I had been told for 15 years that this was not something my body would do." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was measured and specific, the voice she always used for things that mattered. And then it did. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the almost smile, not the careful flatness he used when he was managing something. This was unmanaged, unguarded in the way that news which reaches past a person's defenses always reaches past them. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Certain enough to tell you. How long have you known?" She was quiet for a moment. "Before we exchanged," she said. He went still again, differently this time. "You knew before the beads?" "Yes." "And you waited. I needed to know that you were choosing me," she said. "Not the child, not the fact of a child. Me. What we are. What we've built. I needed that to be the reason you chose. Not obligation, not circumstance. You." He looked at the beads on the table, at his brace, at her hands, still and steady across from him, the hands that had held nails for him and tied every knot and carved bone for 11 days into the exact shape of what he needed before he knew he needed it. "I'm terrified," he said. "Good. That's not a reassurance. It's not supposed to be. Terrified parents pay attention." She looked at him steadily. "This child will have a mother who can't walk and a father who can't grip. Not without a brace, he said. She almost smiled. He caught it. Not the almost this time. It finished. It was the first time he had seen it complete. He was still sitting with that on his face, unfamiliar as a room he hadn't been in for years, when he heard the horses. 3 of them, from the west. He was at the window before Vera moved. His hand found the rifle above the mantel, old reflex, old habit. The rifle was down and in his left hand before he had decided to reach for it. 3 riders, he said. Harrow in front. How do you know? The middle one rides like someone who believes the horse is a statement about his importance. I know that ride. Vera was already moving. She pulled the blanket from the cot and settled it across her lap on the platform. Her knife disappeared beneath it. Her hands went to the wheel rims, steady and unhurried. How many? She asked. 3. Harrow, Solon, and a younger man I don't know. They came to the fence line and stopped. Harrow in front, older than Cale remembered, the leanness in his face of a man who had stopped pretending about something he'd been pretending about for a long time. Solon to his left. And on his right, a younger man named Roven, perhaps 30, a face Cale had not seen before, hand resting on the grip of a short sword with the practiced ease of someone who had been told that was where the hand goes in situations like this, and had done it long enough that it felt natural. Cale stepped onto the porch. Harrow's voice carried the weight that voices carry in open country when the speaker has spent decades in outdoor command. Cale, been a while, not long enough. I see you've been keeping busy. His eyes moved past Cale to the doorway, to the platform visible just inside, to Vera's shape behind the glass of the window. State your business. The mines were ours, Harrow said, laid by our unit, our hands, our orders. If an orc survived one of our fields, that is my concern. Your concern ended when the ceasefire was signed. Ceasefire doesn't close the books. Interesting accounting from the man who ordered them planted. Harrow's expression did not shift. He had been wearing the same face for 30 years, the face of a man who decided early that certainty was more useful than doubt and had arranged his thinking accordingly. I had men who didn't come home from the Ridge engagement, he said. Good men, men you served alongside, men with families. I want that acknowledged. Cale said nothing. I want to talk to her. No, that's not your call. It's my land, my porch, my call. Harrow looked at him. At the right hand with the brace on it, the rifle in the left. At the face of a man who had spent 3 years alone in a field pulling up the evidence of Harrow's decisions one at a time, and had apparently stopped being interested in Harrow's conclusions somewhere along the way. I had 3 men who didn't come home, Harrow said again. His voice carried something underneath it now. Something that had been there the whole time beneath the authority and the grievance. Something that sounded, if you knew what to listen for, like a man who had been carrying a particular weight for a long time and had told himself the weight was duty rather than guilt, because duty was easier to stand upright under. The door opened behind Cale. He didn't turn. He heard the wheels. Vera rolled onto the porch. She stopped beside him. Not behind him. Beside him, the blanket across her lap, hands on the wheel rims, her face level and unhurried in the way of someone who has been in positions of disadvantage before and has learned that composure is the one thing nobody can take without your cooperation. Harrow looked at her, at the stumps visible at the blanket's edge, at the green skin and the steady eyes and the quality of stillness that belongs to someone who has already decided what they will and will not do before the conversation starts. You were at the Ridge engagement, he said. I was at every engagement in this sector. She met his gaze without effort. Which one? The one where David Marsh didn't come home. Corporal, 24 years old, brown hair. He carried a photograph of his daughter in his breast pocket. Silence. Harrow's jaw shifted slightly. Not because the name surprised him, because the details did. Because a person who remembers a dead soldier's hair color and what he carried in his pocket is not the abstraction that grievance requires. He died clean, she said. I made sure of it. He was down and not getting up, and I could see what he was in. I ended it fast. There was no suffering in those last seconds. That's what I can tell you. I can tell you that exactly. Harrow stared at her. Roven, the young man on the right, had gone very still. Vera looked at him. Something happened between them, a recognition that passed without language. The specific flicker of 2 people who have occupied the same place from opposite directions and are now, impossibly, occupying the same moment from the same side. She had seen his face before. Not here. In the field. She was certain of it without being able to name the exact day, and from the look on his face, he was equally certain. Rovin looked at her. He looked at the stumps at the edge of the blanket. He looked at the brace on Cale's right hand and at Cale standing on the porch of a cabin that was clearly shared, and at the field beyond it with its red cloth markers and its 3 years of patient, careful work. His hand left the sword grip. He turned his horse and rode west. Not because Harrow gave him a signal, not because Solon moved. Before either of them did anything, before Harrow had registered what was happening, the young man simply turned his horse at an even pace and rode back the way they had come. He did not look back. Solon watched him go, looked at Harrow. Harrow looked at the porch. The authority in his posture was still there. It had not collapsed. But something in its foundation had shifted, in the way that a structure shifts when one load-bearing element has been quietly removed. The certainty that had been holding the grievance in place was no longer entirely certain of itself. She pulled the blanket from her lap. The stumps, Marin's wrapping, tight and professional, ending where the knees used to begin. She let him look. "You want acknowledgement," she said. "Here it is. This is what acknowledgement looks like." She looked at him without performance, without anger that needed to announce itself, with the flat directness of someone presenting a fact that has its own weight and does not need amplification. "Your mines took my legs. My spear took your men. You want the ledger balanced. It doesn't balance. It was never going to balance. That's what war is. You know that. You have always known that. The question is whether you keep asking the ground to give you something it doesn't have." Harrow sat on his horse in the morning light and looked at the woman on the porch of the cabin that wasn't supposed to be hers. He looked at the field behind the cabin, the red cloth markers standing at their posts across the ground, the evidence of 3 years of someone doing the work. "And now," he said, "what does closing the books look like to you?" Cale spoke. Quiet and steady, the voice of a man who had spent 3 years alone with a difficult question and had arrived at the only answer that held up. "That field," he said, "I've been pulling your minds out of it one at a time for 3 years. Every one I find is one less person who ends up where she is. That's the work. That's what closing the books looks like. Not this, not a conversation on a porch about who owes what to whom. The work. One mine at a time until there are none left. That's how the debt gets paid. Not with anyone's body, with the work." Harrow looked at him for a long time. The field stretched behind the cabin. The markers stood in their irregular lines. There were fewer of them now than there had been 3 years ago. There would be fewer still by next year, and fewer the year after that, because the man on the porch was patient and accurate and showed up every morning without anyone asking him to. "This isn't finished," Harrow said. "It finished 2 years ago," Cale said. "You just haven't read the ceasefire." Something moved in Harrow's face. Not defeat, not agreement. The particular expression of a man who has encountered an argument he cannot immediately answer and has enough honesty left in him to acknowledge that to himself, even if he cannot acknowledge it aloud. He held the look for a moment longer. Then he turned his horse. Solon turned his. They rode west without looking back, and the dust settled slowly back onto the road and was gone. Cale stood on the porch for a long time after. Vara's hands had been steady throughout. They were still steady, but when the last of the hoofbeats had faded entirely, her right hand came up from the wheel rim and rested on his left hand where it held the rifle. She didn't grip, just rested. He lowered the rifle. They sat on the porch together in the morning light, and the field was quiet, and the markers stood at their posts across the ground, and nothing moved except the creek in the middle distance, saying what it always said, which was that water finds its way and the ground holds things until someone comes to take them out. That night she worked at the table by lamplight, not carving but writing. Charcoal on rough paper, working in the old orc marking script she had grown up with before the war had reorganized everything. Cale slept or tried to. He heard the scratch of charcoal, steady and deliberate, and at some point it became part of the sounds the cabin made, and he slept without deciding to. In the morning she showed him what she had written. He couldn't read it. "What does it say?" "It says what we exchanged, what we are, what the child will be." She looked at the paper. In the old way, the healer kept the record. But the healer I have doesn't live here, and the tradition I'm using belongs to a clan that no longer has standing over it. So I'm writing it myself. She folded the paper once. It goes with the beads. He looked at her bead on the table, and his bead beside it, and the folded paper next to both of them. Is there anything else that needs doing? He asked. In the tradition. She thought about it. The healer would have spoken words over the exchange, she said. Something about the line, about the two notches meeting. She was quiet for a moment. But the healer I know is the one who looked back when she walked away. And I've learned something about looking back. What's that? She looked at him across the table. The mornings are still happening, she said. 8 of them so far. Inside, in this cabin, every morning you get up and make the fire and go out to the field and come back. That's the words. The mornings are what the words are supposed to mean. He looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up both beads from the table, held one in each hand, the left and the braced right, and brought them together in his palms. The notches met. The line completed itself. He held them together for a moment, then set them down gently on the folded paper. He put his right hand, the braced hand, the hand she had rebuilt from a piece of bone she had carried 11 days through a minefield, against her stomach. The brace was warm from his skin. The fingers could not close. The grip would never be what it was. But the hand rested there, present, held in the position she had carved for it, which was the same as being held there by her. She put both of her hands over his. Outside the window, the field ran all the way to the ridge. The red cloth markers stood where they had been planted, each one above something that had been sitting in the ground with the patience of things that do not know why they are waiting and do not need to know in order to keep waiting. Cale would go out this morning and find another one. Mark it. Come back. The next day, find another. Come back. The work had no end date. It had a direction. He had been moving in that direction alone for 3 years. Inside the cabin, the platform's wheels sat locked against the floorboards. The knife was within reach on the table. The second chair was occupied. The lamp had been burning since the night before and had oil enough to last until noon. The crack above the stove still ran through the plaster, pale against the darker clay around it. The mark of a place that had opened once and been closed again with what was available. It held. The child would come before the last of the winter ground thawed. Before the field went green again, with the particular insistence of Appalachian spring, which is the most determined green in the world, the green of things that did not survive by being delicate. She had been told for 15 years that her body was finished. Wrong chemistry, wrong conditions. The math didn't work, and the math had been right. Under the conditions the math had assumed. Then the conditions changed. A man with a rod instead of a rifle. A platform instead of a stretcher. 8 mornings instead of none. Bones that remembered things they had been told to forget. Cale picked up the iron rod from beside the door. Back by noon, he said. I'll be here. He stepped off the porch onto the packed earth path, turned once and looked back at the cabin, at the door, at the threshold board he had cut and fitted in the dark while a storm moved through the ridge, at the window where her shape was visible against the interior light, hands on the wheel rims, watching him. He looked at her until she raised one hand from the rim. Then he turned and walked into the field, rod in his left hand, and began the work of the morning. Each step placed with care, each probe deliberate. 46 markers still standing across the visible ground. He would pull another today. Leave the red cloth, mark the absence, move on to the next one at a time. That was how it was done. Behind him, the cabin held what it held. A woman who had crawled 300 yards through a minefield on principle. A braced hand that had been given something new to remember. 2 beads on a folded piece of paper written in a script the healer had kept before the healer stopped looking. A child that the math had said was impossible, growing in the body of someone who had spent 15 years being told what her body could not do and had apparently not passed that information along to the relevant parts. The field was quiet around him. The morning was cold and clear. The creek said what it always said. He probed the ground ahead, found it solid, moved forward, one step at a time in the direction of cleared ground, in the direction of a morning that had already begun and would not stop beginning. That was enough. That was, for now, exactly enough.